Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step carefully into a narrow alley where the night air feels thick and watchful, where lantern light flickers against damp brick, and where something slower than the city itself seems to be waiting for you. You follow that faint thread of warmth and smoke curling through the darkness, curious in the way people always are when something is hidden just out of sight. And fair warning, you probably would not survive this place very comfortably, at least not without a few adjustments to your expectations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, share your location and local time in the comments. It is always fascinating to see where in the world you are listening from. Now, dim the lights. You move forward slowly, your steps soft against uneven stones that hold the day's dampness. The alley narrows almost without you noticing. Walls lean inward as if they have spent years inching closer together. Above you, a few lines of laundry hang forgotten, shifting gently in the night air, catching the glow of a single lantern that burns with a dull amber light. A commonly accepted historical understanding is that many opium dens in the 1870s were tucked away in dense urban neighbourhoods, often in port cities like London, San Francisco or Hong Kong, where trade routes made the substance more accessible than most people would like to admit. You feel that connection here without needing to see it. Somewhere far beyond that is alley, ships of unloaded crates. Money has changed hands, and eventually all of that movement has led to this quiet, enclosed space ahead of you. You pause for a moment, not because anything stops you, but because something shifts in your awareness. The city behind you is still there. You can almost hear it. A distant carriage, a voice calling out, the faint rhythm of life continuing as it always does. But here those sounds feel softened as though wrapped in cloth. You take another step. The lantern light grows stronger, and with it the smell becomes clearer. It is not sharp, not unpleasant in an obvious way, but it is heavy. Sweet almost, with a lingering warmth that settles low in your chest as you breathe it in. You notice the door before you realise you have been looking for it. It is small, plain, set into the wall without decoration. If you are not paying attention, you might walk past it entirely, and perhaps that's the point. A quirky detail often mentioned in scattered accounts is that some opium dens were deliberately made to look unremarkable from the outside, blending into ordinary buildings to avoid attention, which means that for many first-time visitors, the entrance itself felt almost anticlimactic. You feel that now. There is no grand sign, no dramatic threshold, just a door that seems to wait without invitation. You stand there just for a second longer. Your hand lifts, then pauses mid-air. There is something about crossing into a place like this that feels different from simply entering a shop or a home. It is not fear exactly, more like a quiet awareness that whatever is on the other side will move at a different pace than the world you just left. Historians still argue whether the reputation of opium dens in the 19th century was exaggerated by sensational journalism or whether the darker aspects were simply hidden from polite society. Standing here, you realise that both possibilities can exist at once. Places like this can be ordinary and unsettling at the same time, depending on where you stand. You let your hand settle against the wood. It feels worn, slightly warm, as though it has been touched many times throughout the evening. The surface is not smooth. Small imperfections press against your fingertips, reminders of age and use. You push gently, the door gives without resistance. And just like that, the outside world shifts. The first thing you notice is the change in light. It is dimmer inside, but not completely dark. A soft, uneven glow fills the room beyond, coming from sources you cannot fully see yet. The brightness does not reach far. It gathers in small pockets, leaving the edges of the space to fade into shadow. The second thing is the warmth, not the clean warmth of sunlight or a well-kept fire. This is different. It lingers. It clings. The air feels thicker as though it has been breathed many times already. You step inside. The door closes behind you with a quiet, almost polite sound, and immediately the noise of the city disappears. Not entirely, but enough that it no longer feels close. The world you came from becomes distant, like a memory you have not fully let go of yet. You remain still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, letting your breathing settle. The smell is stronger now. That same sweetness, but layered with something older. Fabric, wood, a faint trace of oil or ash. It is not overwhelming, but it is persistent, like a presence that refuses to leave. You become aware of the floor beneath you. It is not perfectly even. There are slight variations, subtle dips that suggest long use rather than neglect. Your steps slow naturally as you begin to match the pace of the space. Somewhere deeper in the room you hear a soft sound. Not conversation exactly. More like the murmur of voices kept deliberately low. A shared understanding that loudness does not belong here. You take another step, then another. Shapes begin to form in the dim light. Low platforms, figures resting or reclining. The outline of a wall lined with fabric that seems to absorb rather than reflect the glow around it. You do not fully understand the room yet, but you feel it. There is a rhythm here, slow, repeating, a quiet pattern of movement and stillness that does not rush to reveal itself. You draw a careful breath, and for the first time since entering you realize that your body has already begun to adjust. Your shoulders lower slightly. Your steps become softer. Even your thoughts seem to move with less urgency. You have not been here long, and yet something about the place has already started to change the way you exist within it. You glance back just briefly. The door is still there, closed, unremarkable, and already it feels farther away than it should. You turn forward again. The room waits, not demanding nor inviting, simply present in the same quiet way it has likely been for years, holding its routines, its people and its slow unfolding hours within these dimly lit walls. You take one more step inward and let the night settle around you. You stand just inside the room, letting your eyes take their time. Nothing here rushes to meet you. The light is soft and uneven, gathered in small pools rather than spread evenly across the space. It comes from low lamps, their flames steady but subdued, each one creating its own quiet circle of visibility. Your gaze moves slowly. The walls are closed, though not oppressively so. Fabric hangs in places dark and heavy, muting the edges of the room. It softens the space, turning hard lines into gentle shadows. The ceiling feels lower than you expected, or perhaps it is simply the way the light presses downward, encouraging everything to remain close to the ground. You take another step forward. The air shifts slightly around you. Warmer near the centre of the room, cooler at the edges. It is not a dramatic difference, but enough that your skin notices it. Your breathing adjusts again, slower now, as if the room itself prefers it that way. A broadly recognised detail from historical descriptions is that many opium dens were intentionally arranged with low platforms or pallets, encouraging people to recline rather than sit upright. You see that clearly now. Along the walls and through the middle of the space, narrow wooden frames are covered with thin mats and layered fabrics. Some are occupied, some are empty. All are close together, leaving only narrow paths between them. You move carefully through one of those paths. Your steps are instinctively quieter here, not because anyone has told you to be silent, but because the room seems to absorb noise and return it in softer form. Even the sound of your clothing shifting feels more noticeable than usual. A soft murmur reaches you again. This time you can distinguish it more clearly. Two voices, perhaps three, speaking in low tones. The words are not meant for you, and so they remain indistinct, blending into the overall atmosphere like the steady flicker of the lamps. You glance toward the sound. Figures lie close to one another, some turned inward, some facing the ceiling, others resting on their sides. Their movements are minimal. A hand shifts slightly, a head tilts, a breath deepens, nothing abrupt, nothing sharp. A quirky observation found in some travel accounts is that first-time visitors often expected a dramatic scene filled with chaos or intensity, only to be surprised by how subdued and almost ordinary the environment appeared. You feel that quiet contradiction now. There is no spectacle here, no sudden display, just a steady, almost ritual calm. You pause beside an empty pallet. The fabric covering it is worn but clean enough its surface slightly uneven from use. You reach out, letting your fingers brush against it. It is neither soft nor hard, simply functional, a place designed for rest more than comfort. You do not sit yet. Instead, you remain standing, letting the room continue to reveal itself. Near one wall, a small cluster of objects catches your attention. A low table, a few cups, something metallic reflecting a faint glint of light. You do not fully understand their purpose yet, but they feel important, placed with intention rather than carelessness. You notice too how people move within the space. Slowly, deliberately. When someone shifts position, it happens with a kind of awareness, as though sudden motion would disturb something fragile. Even the act of reaching for an object carries a certain patience. You take another step forward, and then another. Each movement feels like it belongs to the room more than to you. A subtle realization settles in your mind. The outside world with its constant urgency does not follow you here. The expectations you carried in with you begin to loosen not all at once, but gradually, like tension easing from your shoulders, without you quite noticing when it began. Historians still argue whether the calm atmosphere described in many opium dens was a genuine reflection of daily life or a perspective shaped by selective observation. Standing here, you sense that the truth likely lies somewhere in between. What you see is calm. What you do not yet understand may be more complicated. You shift your weight slightly. The floor beneath you creaks just enough to remind you that the building itself is old, worn by years of use. But even that sound feels soft and absorbed before it can travel far. A figure nearby turns their head. Not sharply, not with suspicion, just a brief acknowledgement that you are there. Their eyes pass over you without lingering, as though new arrivals are not unusual. You are not an interruption. You are simply another presence in a space that has seen many. You feel that in the way no one calls out to you. No one demands your attention. The room does not greet you, but it does not reject you either. You take a slow breath. The scent in the air settles deeper now. Less noticeable as a distinct smell, more like part of the environment itself. It wraps around the space, consistent and unchanging, like the low hum of something always present. You finally lower yourself onto the empty pallet. Carefully, your body adjusts to the surface. It is firmer than you might prefer, but it holds your weight evenly. Your hands rest against the fabric, feeling its texture more clearly now. Slightly rough, worn smooth in places where countless others have rested before you. You lean back just a little, not fully reclining, not yet. Your eyes move across the room, again slower this time. You begin to notice patterns. The way the light gathers near certain corners. The way people position themselves in relation to one another. The quiet rhythm of breath and stillness that seems to pulse gently through the space. A widely noted aspect of such environments is that they often encouraged a shared stillness, where individuals existed side by side without the need for constant interaction. You feel that shared presence now. You are not alone, but you are not required to engage. You simply exist here. For a moment you close your eyes, not fully, just enough to soften what you see. The sounds become clearer in their absence. The faint murmur of voices, the subtle shift of fabric, the quiet, almost imperceptible movements of those around you. You open your eyes again. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels slightly more settled. You realize with a quiet clarity that crossing the threshold was not just a physical act. It was a transition into a different pace of life. One that does not hurry, one that does not demand, one that simply unfolds slowly around you. You adjust your position slightly on the pallet and allow yourself to remain. You remain where you are for a few breaths longer, letting the room settle around you before your attention shifts toward a quieter corner near the entrance. It is not immediately obvious, but once you notice it, you realize there is a small point of order within this otherwise slow and drifting space. A low desk, not large, not impressive, but positioned in such a way that anyone entering or leaving must pass within its view. Behind it sits a figure, still upright, more alert than anyone else in the room. You do not feel watched in a harsh way, but you do sense awareness there. A steady presence that tracks movement without interrupting it. This is not someone drifting in the same quiet rhythm as the others. This is someone who remains just slightly outside it. You rise carefully from your pallet. Your movements remain slow, partly out of instinct now, partly because the room encourages it. You step between the narrow spaces, passing close to those already resting. No one objects, no one turns sharply. The shared understanding continues. You are allowed to move as long as you do not disturb. As you approach the desk, the details become clearer. The surface is worn smooth in places where hands have rested again and again. A small lamp sits to one side, its light more focused here than elsewhere, illuminating a few simple objects. A ledger, a cup, a small collection of tools whose purpose you do not yet fully understand. A widely accepted historical fact is that opium dens were often run as structured businesses, rather than chaotic hideaways, with keepers maintaining records, managing payments, and enforcing basic order within the space. You see that structure here quietly embedded into the routine. The person behind the desk looks up, not abruptly, just enough to meet your presence. Their expression is neutral, neither welcoming nor unfriendly, simply attentive. You pause a short distance away. There is no spoken instruction, no sign telling you what to do, and yet you sense that something is expected of you here, a step in the process, a small ritual that marks your entry not just into the room but into its rhythm. You reach into your pocket. The coins you carry feel heavier than they did outside, not physically but in meaning. You are not buying something in the usual sense. You're participating in a system that has its own rules, its own quiet agreements. You place them gently on the desk. The sound is soft, almost absorbed before it can travel. The keeper glances down briefly, then back at you. There is no counting in the obvious sense, no prolonged inspection. Either the amount is understood or it is not questioned in the moment. A quirky detail noted in certain accounts suggests that in some dens, regular patrons were trusted enough that transactions became nearly wordless, with familiarity replacing formal exchange. You sense a trace of that here. Even as a newcomer, the process is minimal, efficient, unspoken. The keeper reaches for the ledger. The pages are thick, slightly uneven, marked with lines of writing that you cannot fully read from where you stand. A hand moves across the page, adding something brief. A record, a mark of your presence, perhaps. Historians still argue whether these records were primarily for business tracking or for maintaining informal systems of trust and debt within the community of regular visitors. Watching this quiet act, you can imagine both being true at once. The keeper sets the ledger aside. Then, with a small practice motion, they gesture toward the room behind you. Not a command, more like a permission. You understand it without needing words. You are now part of the space. You nod slightly, though you are not sure if it's expected. There is a subtle shift in how you feel. Before you're an observer, someone standing just inside the edge of the experience. Now there is a sense, however faint, that you belong here for the time being, that your presence has been acknowledged and accepted. You step back, carefully, turning once more toward the low platforms and the quiet figures resting upon them. As you move away, you notice something else. The keeper does not follow you with their gaze. Their attention returns to the desk, to the room as a whole, rather than to any one individual. It is a form of watchfulness that does not intrude, but also never fully relaxes. You pass again between the pallets. This time your movement feels slightly more natural, less hesitant. You understand the spacing better now, the distance between bodies, the way people arrange themselves to allow passage without contact. You return to your place, lowering yourself once more onto the same worn fabric. Your hands settle where they did before, but something has changed. You are no longer just noticing the room. You are participating in it. A broader observation often made by social historians is that spaces like this operated on quiet agreements rather than strict enforcement, where behavior was guided more by shared understanding than by explicit rules. You feel that now in your own actions. You have not been told how to behave, yet you already know. You lean back a little further this time, allowing your body to rest more fully. Your eyes drift toward the desk again just for a moment. The keeper remains there, still present, a fixed point in a room that otherwise flows slowly around them. Then your attention shifts away, back to the dim light, the soft murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of breath and stillness. You notice a faint sense of reassurance in the structure you have just encountered. Even in a place that feels removed from the outside world, there is order. There is routine. There is a quiet system that keeps everything from dissolving into chaos. And that in its own way makes it easier to remain. You adjust your position slightly, your shoulders easing down, your breathing slowing once more. The room accepts you again without comment, without acknowledgement, as though you had always been part of it. And somewhere behind you at that small desk near the entrance, the quiet business of the night continues steady and unchanged, holding the delicate balance of this hidden world together. You settle back onto the pallet, but your attention does not fully rest. Now that you have been acknowledged by the keeper, the room feels slightly clearer, as though a thin layer of uncertainty has been lifted. What once seemed undefined begins to reveal its quieter rules. They are not written. They are not spoken aloud, but they are everywhere. You notice it first in the way people arrange their bodies. No one sprawls carelessly across the narrow platforms. Each person occupies only the space they need, leaving just enough room for others to pass. Arms are tucked close, legs are folded or extended with intention. Even in stillness, there is a kind of awareness of those nearby. You shift your own position slightly. Instinctively, you draw your elbows in closer, adjusting the way you rest so that your presence does not spill into the narrow walkway. It happens without effort, as though you have been watching long enough to understand what is expected. A well-documented pattern in descriptions of opium dens is that regular visitors quickly learned an unspoken etiquette where quiet respect for shared space was essential in maintaining the calm atmosphere. You feel that pattern guiding you now, shaping your movements without the need for instruction. Near the entrance, you notice something else. A small cluster of shoes. They are not arranged neatly, but neither are they scattered carelessly. Placed off to one side, they form a loose boundary between the outside and the interior. You had not thought about it when you entered, but now it becomes clear. Many have removed their footwear before settling in. A subtle sign, a transition from street to space. You glance down at your own shoes. For a moment you hesitate. Then quietly you slip them off. The floor feels different beneath your feet. Cooler, more immediate. You sense the texture more clearly now, the slight unevenness that had been softened before by the barrier of leather. A small, almost unnoticed shift, and yet it deepens your sense of being here. An unusual detail recorded in certain accounts suggests that in some dens, removing shoes was not strictly required but became a shared habit, partly for comfort and partly to preserve the quiet of the room. The absence of hard footsteps makes every movement softer, less intrusive. You return to your pallet, placing your shoes near its edge. Your movements feel more deliberate now. You lower yourself again, this time with greater ease. Around you, the same quiet rhythm continues. Someone shifts slightly. Another figure adjusts a blanket. A faint cough breaks the silence, then fades as quickly as it appeared. No one reacts, no one looks up. The room absorbs these small interruptions and returns to stillness. You begin to notice the importance of posture here. Those who lie flat seem to drift more deeply into their own space, their faces relaxed, their breathing slow. Others remain propped slightly on one elbow, their gaze unfocused, but not entirely withdrawn. Each position carries a different kind of presence. You try both subtly, first leaning to back, letting your shoulders sink into the fabric, then lifting slightly, resting your weight unevenly. Each shift changes how you feel, not dramatically, but enough to notice. A line from historical observations comes to mind that the physical arrangement of these spaces was designed to guide behavior, encouraging stillness and reducing the kind of restless movement that might disrupt others. You feel that influence now, not as a restriction, but as a quiet suggestion. You glance again toward the others. There is a shared understanding here that extends beyond space. It touches sound as well. No one speaks loudly. Even those who talk do so in low measured tones, their words blending into the ambient murmur. Laughter, if it happens, is brief and contained, as though allowed only in small amounts. You become aware of your own breathing again. It feels louder than it should. You slow it slightly, not forcing it, just allowing it to match the rhythm around you. In doing so, you notice something else. Your thoughts begin to quiet, not disappear, but soften. The urgency you carried from the street fades further into the background. The need to move to decide to act loosens its grip. Scholars have debated how much of this calm was influenced by the substance itself, and how much came from the environment that surrounded it. Sitting here before anything else has changed, you sense that the setting alone plays a powerful role. You adjust the fabric beneath your hand. It is slightly warmer now, whether from your own body or from the lingering heat of others who have used it before, you cannot tell. But the effect is subtle and steady. A sense of continuity. You are not the first to sit here. You will not be the last. You notice a small gesture from someone nearby. A figure lifts their hand, slowly reaching toward an object placed beside them. The movement is careful, almost practiced. No sudden shifts, no unnecessary motion. They take what they need, then return their hand to rest. It is a simple act, but it carries a quiet precision. You find yourself mirroring it in small ways. When you adjust your position, you do so more slowly. When you shift your weight, you do so with awareness. Without realizing it, you are learning the language of the room, not through words, but through observation. A broader insight from social studies of such environments suggests that these shared behaviors helped maintain a fragile balance where many individuals could coexist in close proximity without conflict. You feel that balance now. It is not enforced. It is maintained collectively. You lean back again, more fully this time, allowing your head to rest. Your gaze drifts upwards toward the dim ceiling where shadows gather and soften. The light does not reach fully there. It fades, gradually leaving the upper space undefined. You take a slow breath, and then another. The room continues, unchanged, steady, holding you within its quiet structure. You no longer feel like you are figuring it out. You are simply part of it. Your hands rest more loosely now. Your shoulders sink a little deeper, and the small unspoken rules that once felt uncertain now feel almost natural, guiding you gently into the same calm rhythm that surrounds everyone here. You remain lying back, your body now more at ease with the surface beneath you, your breathing quieter, your movements less deliberate because they no longer need to be. The room has not changed, and yet your experience of it continues to shift in small, almost unnoticed ways. It is the air that draws your attention now, not just its warmth, but its texture. You take a slow breath in, and for a moment you focus on what it carries. The scent that first greeted you at the door has deepened. It is no longer something you notice in sharp contrast. Instead, it has settled into layers. A soft sweetness that lingers. The faint trace of oil from the lamps. The worn fabric that holds years of use within its fibres. Everything blends. Nothing stands apart. A widely observed detail in contemporary descriptions is that the air inside opium dens often became dense over time, shaped by repeated use-limited ventilation and the accumulation of smoke that clung to every surface. You feel that density now, not as something oppressive but as something constant. You breathe in again. The air moves slowly. It feels heavier than the night outside, as though it carries a memory of all the breaths that have come before yours. You turn your head slightly. The fabric hanging along the wall comes into clearer view. It is darker than you first thought, not by design, but by age. The edges are uneven in places. Small folds gather where it has been adjusted, shifted, and left to settle again. You reach out, your fingers brush against it. It is thicker than it looks, slightly coarse, and it holds warmth in a way that feels almost deliberate, as though it has absorbed the room's atmosphere over years and now gives it back slowly. An unusual observation recorded in some lesser-known accounts suggests that fabrics in these spaces were rarely cleaned in the modern sense, but instead maintained through regular use with the accumulation of smoke and oils, forming a kind of unintended seal that trapped both heat and scent. You feel that history in the material beneath your hand. You let your hand rest there for a moment longer, then withdraw it. Your attention shifts to the ceiling. The beams above are faintly visible, their outlines softened by the low light. In certain angles you can see where smoke has gathered over time, leaving subtle darkened traces along the wood. It is not something you would notice at first glance, but once seen it becomes part of the room's quiet story. You take another breath, and this time you notice something else. The air is not still. Not entirely. There are slow movements within it, currents so gentle they barely register. A slight change in warmth as someone shifts nearby. A faint disturbance when a curtain stirs. These small variations pass through the space without urgency. You feel them against your skin, barely, but enough to remind you that even here the environment continues to move. You adjust your position slightly. Your shoulder presses deeper into the pallet. The fabric beneath you responds with a soft give shaped by use rather than design. It holds your weight in a way that feels familiar even though you have only just arrived. A recognized insight from environmental studies of historical interiors is that enclosed spaces like this often developed their own microclimates where temperature, humidity, and air composition differed noticeably from the outside world. You sense that contained environment now separate and self-sustaining. You glance toward the lamps. Their flames are small, controlled. The light they produce is steady, not flickering wildly but breathing gently in place. Each one contributes to the overall glow, but none dominate it. You watch one for a moment, the way the flame leans slightly, then returns upright. A subtle rhythm. You realize that even the light here moves slowly. Nothing in this room rushes. Your eyes drift again across the space. The figures around you remain largely unchanged. A hand shifts. A blanket is pulled closer. Someone exhales more deeply, their chest rising and falling in a steady pattern. The room continues its quiet existence, and you continue to adjust within it. Scholars have long debated whether the sensory environment of opium dens played a role as significant as the substance itself in shaping the experience of those within. Sitting here before any further involvement, you begin to understand that question more clearly. The atmosphere alone has weight. It influences you, not by force, but by presence. You feel it in your breathing, in the way your thoughts no longer move as quickly, in the subtle heaviness that settles in your limbs, not unpleasant but noticeable. You close your eyes briefly. The scent remains, the warmth remains, the faint movement of air continues brushing lightly against your skin. You open your eyes again. Nothing has changed, and yet you feel more deeply part of it than before. You adjust the position of your hand, resting it against your chest. Your fingers move slightly, then grow still. There is a quiet realization forming, one that does not arrive suddenly, but builds gradually. This room is not defined by any single element. Not the light, not the smell, not the people. It is the combination. The layering of all these small details into something that cannot be separated into parts without losing its meaning. You take another slow breath and let it out just as slowly. The air returns to the room, becoming part of it again. Just as you are beginning to do, you lie there for a while longer, letting the air settle into you, until your attention begins to shift again. Not outward in a broad sense, but towards something more focused, more precise. It begins with a small movement near the low table you noticed earlier. A figure sits there now, not fully upright, but more engaged than the others. Their posture carries intention. Their hands move with care, each action measured and unhurried. You watch. At first, you do not fully understand what you are seeing. The objects arranged on the table seem simple, almost ordinary. A small lamp with a narrow flame, a long, slender pipe, a thin metal tool, a dark substance resting in a small container. Nothing appears dramatic, and yet the way these items are handled suggests something practiced. A well-established observation from historical records is that preparing opium was not a casual act, but a skill that required experience, steady hands, and patience. You see that skill here in the smallest details. The figure reaches for the metal tool. It moves with quiet precision, lifting a small amount of the substance. The motion is slow, controlled, as though rushing would disrupt something important. You notice how steady their hand remains, even as the room around them continues its gentle shifting rhythm. They bring the tool toward the lamp, holding it just close enough to the flame, not touching it, not letting it burn, just warming it. You watch the subtle change. The substance softens. Its surface shifts slightly, becoming more pliable, more responsive. The figure turns the tool slightly, adjusting its angle, ensuring that the heat reaches it evenly. It is a delicate balance. Too close and it would burn, too far and nothing would happen. A curious detail mentioned in certain accounts is that experienced users could judge the exact moment the substance was ready simply by its appearance and scent without needing any external measure. Watching now, you can almost believe it. The figure moves the tool away from the flame, then with careful attention transfers the prepared amount toward the pipe. The pipe itself is longer than you expected, its surface smooth, worn by repeated use. The bowl at one end is small, designed to hold only a precise amount. Nothing excessive, everything measured. The figure adjusts their position slightly, leaning closer. Their movements remain calm, unhurried. They place the prepared substance into the bowl, then pause. For a moment nothing happens, and yet that pause feels important, as though it marks a transition between preparation and use. You notice your own breathing again. It has slowed without you realizing. Your body has adjusted further to the rhythm of the room. Scholars still debate whether the ritualized nature of preparation contributed to the experience as much as the substance itself, shaping expectations and deepening the sense of immersion. Watching this careful sequence, you begin to understand how ritual alone can alter perception. The figure lifts the pipe, bringing it into position. Their body remains relaxed but focused. Every movement continues to follow that same steady pace. No sudden gestures, no wasted motion. They draw closer to the lamp, aligning the pipe with the flame. The positioning is et. You can see how practiced it is. The flame touches the bowl just enough. A faint change occurs, subtle, almost invisible, and yet the figure responds immediately. Their breathing shifts, slower, deeper. You do not hear much, no loud sound, just a slight change in the rhythm of their breath. They hold the position for a moment, then gently move the pipe away, resting again. The entire process has taken time, more time than you expected, and that seems to be part of it. Nothing here is rushed, nothing is done without attention. You realize now that what you are witnessing is not just an action, but a sequence that has likely been repeated countless times, each step learned, refined, passed on quietly from one person to another. A lesser-known insight found in some descriptions suggests that in certain dens, newcomers often relied on more experienced individuals to guide them through these preparations, turning what might seem like a solitary act into a shared practice. You can imagine that happening here even if you do not see it directly. You shift slightly on your palate, your body responding to the longer stillness. Your hand moves across the fabric, feeling its texture again, grounding you in your own presence. Your eyes return to the table. The figure has relaxed now, their posture softer, the intensity of their focus replaced by quieter stillness. The tools remain where they were placed. Nothing is scattered. Nothing's left carelessly. Everything retains its place within the small ordered space of the table. You take a slow breath, and another. The room continues around you. The same soft murmur, the same dim light, the same steady warmth. And within it, this small act of preparation has added another layer to your understanding. This is not chaos, not disorder. It is structured, measured, built on repetition and quiet knowledge. You feel that realization settle into you? Not as something surprising, but as something that fits. You adjust your position once more, your shoulders easing down, your head resting more fully against the palate. Your gaze softens. The details of the table begin to blur slightly as your focus drifts, but the memory of what you have seen remains clear. The careful movements, the patience, the quiet precision. You close your eyes for a brief moment, then open them again. The room is still there, unchanged, holding its rhythm, and you now understand a little more of how that rhythm is created. You remain still for a time after watching the careful preparation at the table, letting the quiet precision of it settle into your understanding. The room feels more familiar now, not because it has changed, but because your attention has begun to notice the people within it more clearly. Until now they have been shapes, movements, quiet presences. Now they begin to separate into individuals. You turn your head slightly. The figure nearest you lies on their side, facing away. Their clothing is worn, the fabric softened by use rather than design. You notice the hands first. Rough, marked by work. The kind of hands that repeat the same motions day after day, carrying weight, lifting, pulling, enduring. An observation often noted in historical descriptions is that many regular visitors to opium dens were labourers, particularly those whose work was physically demanding and poorly paid, seeking rest in whatever form they could find. You see that history written quietly in the details of this person's body. You shift your gaze. Further along, another figure rests differently. Their clothing is cleaner, better maintained, the cut of the fabric more structured. They lie on their back, one arm resting loosely across their chest, their expression calm but distant. A different life, a different path that has led here. You begin to understand that this room gathers people who might never otherwise share the same space. Outside they would pass each other without notice. Here they lie side by side, separated only by a narrow stretch of fabric. You notice a third presence, a man with features that suggest long travel. His clothing carries subtle differences in style, the way he wears it, the way it fits. There is a sense that he belongs to another place, even if he has been here long enough to move with quiet familiarity. In port cities during the 19th century, it was not uncommon for opium dens to become meeting points for migrants and sailors, individuals moving between regions who carried with them habits, customs and connections from distant places. You feel that convergence here contained within this dim room. You listen more closely. The murmur of voices continues, but now you catch fragments. A word spoken in one accent, a reply in another. Not always fully understood, but enough to suggest that language here is fluid, adapting to whoever shares the space. You do not try to follow it. It is not meant for you. Instead, you observe. A small movement draws your attention. Across the room, a younger figure shifts restlessly. Their movements are less controlled, less practiced. A hand lifts, then drops again. Their breathing changes in uneven patterns. New, or perhaps simply unsettled. A curious note from certain period writings suggests that newcomers often stood out not by what they did, but by the lack of stillness in their movements, revealing their unfamiliarity with the slow rhythm of the environment. You recognize that difference now. Not everyone here moves with the same ease. Not everyone has settled into the same quiet pattern. You glance toward the far wall. There, in a slightly more shadowed area, two figures lie closer together. Not touching, but near enough to suggest familiarity. Their stillness mirrors each other. Their breathing seems almost aligned. Companionship, perhaps, or simply the comfort of not being alone. A broader interpretation offered by social historians is that such spaces, despite their reputation, often functioned as places of shared presence, rather than isolation where individuals found a form of quiet coexistence that was difficult to achieve elsewhere. You feel that shared presence, now subtle but unmistakable. You shift slightly on your palate, your own body now part of this arrangement. You are not separate from them, you are simply one more figure within the room. Your gaze moves again, towards someone sitting rather than lying. Their posture is upright, though relaxed. They watch the room in a way that feels different. Not like the keeper at the desk, not responsible for order, but aware in another sense. Observing. Their eyes pass over the others without judgment, without curiosity that seeks to intrude. Just a quiet awareness as though they have seen this scene many times before. You wonder briefly what has brought each person here, not in detail, just in outline. Work, fatigue, habit, curiosity, escape. The reasons are likely as varied as the people themselves. Scholars continue to examine whether opium use in such settings was primarily driven by physical dependence or by social and environmental factors that made these spaces appealing beyond the substance itself. Sitting here, you sense that the answer is not simple. It is layered, just like the room. You notice a faint exchange nearby. Two figures speak quietly. One leans slightly closer, their voice low, almost lost in the surrounding sounds. The other responds with a small nod, a brief shift of expression. No large gestures, no emphasis. Communication here is minimal but sufficient. You realize that conversation is not the center of this space. Presence is. Being here, sharing the same air, the same light, the same slow passage of time. That's enough. You draw a slow breath. Your chest rises, then falls. You feel more settled now than when you arrived. Less like an observer, more like a participant in this quiet arrangement. Your eyes soften again. The details of individual faces begin to blur slightly. Not because they have changed, but because your focus no longer needs to hold on to each one. They are part of the whole. just as you are. You rest your hand lightly against the pallet, your fingers still, your body at ease. Around you, the room continues its steady rhythm. Different lives, different paths, all gathered here not in chaos but in a quiet shared stillness that asks nothing more than your presence. And you remain. You remain where you are, your body now fully settled into the narrow pallet, your awareness no longer searching for new details but beginning instead to notice something more subtle. Time. Not the kind you measure by clocks or schedules, but the kind that reveals itself through feeling. You try at first to mark its passage. You think back to when you entered. The alley, the door, the first breath of heavy air. It does not feel distant, but it does not feel recent either. The memory sits somewhere in between as though it has been gently stretched. You glance toward the entrance. The door remains closed, unchanged. You listen for the city beyond it, but the sounds are faint now, almost imagined. An established observation in period descriptions suggests that environments like this often created a sense of temporal distortion, where the absence of strong external cues made it difficult to judge how much time had passed. You begin to feel that effect for yourself. You take a slow breath, then another. Each one feels complete in its own way, not part of a sequence you need to track. Your attention drifts, not far, just enough that your thoughts lose their sharp edges. You notice the lamps again. Their flames continue their gentle movement, but without any clear change to mark progression. They burn steadily, offering no sense of urgency, no reminder that anything's advancing. You look at the figures around you. Some remain in the same positions, or at least it feels that way. Perhaps they have shifted slightly. A hand moved, a shoulder adjusted. But the overall impression remains constant. Stillness, continuity. A small movement nearby draws your eye. Someone lifts their head briefly, then lowers it again. The motion is slow, as though it exists outside of time rather than within it. You watch it, and then almost without realizing, you stop tracking it altogether. A lesser-known insight from certain observers suggests that the rhythm of life inside opium dens often followed cycles that were detached from the conventional day, shaped instead by individual patterns of rest and activity that overlapped in quiet, irregular ways. Sitting here, you sense that overlapping rhythm. There is no shared beginning, no shared end. Each person moves through their own experience, intersecting with others only briefly. You shift your position slightly, not because you need to, but because your body suggests it. The movement is small, barely noticeable, and yet it feels significant in a space where so little changes at once. You settle again, your breathing remains slow. Even your thoughts begin to wander, not in a restless way, but in a soft drifting pattern. You think of the outside world again, of time as it exists there, measured, divided, structured, and you realize how distant that feels now. Here there is no clear marker of hour or minute, no strong light to signal the passing of night, no sound to remind you of schedules or expectations. Only this steady, unbroken presence. Scholars continue to examine whether this altered sense of time was one of the reasons such spaces held a strong appeal, offering a temporary release from the rigid structures of daily life. As you lie here, you begin to understand that possibility. You feel less aware of before, less concerned with after. You exist more fully in the present moment. You notice your hands, resting lightly, unmoving. You notice your chest, rising, falling. The rhythm is consistent, reliable. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest them. The darkness behind your eyelids feels no different from the dimness of the room. The transition is smooth, almost seamless. You listen. The faint murmur continues, the soft shift of fabric, the quiet movement of breath around you. These sounds do not form a pattern you can follow. They simply exist. You open your eyes again. The room is as it was. No noticeable change. And yet you feel that time has passed. You just cannot say how much. You turn your head slightly, looking toward the small table again. The figure who had been preparing earlier now rest, their posture relaxed, their movements minimal. The tools remain where they were placed, untouched, waiting. Everything here seems to hold its position until it is needed again. You let your gaze drift upward, toward the ceiling. The shadows there feel deeper now. Or perhaps your perception of them has changed. You cannot be certain. A subtle realization forms. Time here is not absent. It is simply different. It moves without announcing itself. Without dividing itself into clear segments, it flows slowly, continuously. You take another breath and allow yourself to stop measuring it. There is nothing to keep track of, nothing to anticipate, only the quiet unfolding of the moment. You adjust your head slightly on the pallet, finding a more comfortable position. Your body responds easily now. No tension, no resistance. You feel a growing sense of detachment from the idea of needing to move forward, to reach the next thing, to mark progress. Here there is no next, only now, and that now stretches gently around you, holding you within it. The room continues, the same dim light, the same quiet figures, the same slow rhythm that neither begins nor ends, and you remain within it, not watching the time pass, but simply existing as it does. You remain suspended in that slow, unmeasured flow, your body at ease, your thoughts softened, until your awareness begins to shift once more. Not toward the room as a whole this time, but toward the bodies within it. Closer, more human, you notice the rise and fall of breathing around you. Not synchronized, not uniform. Each person follows their own rhythm. Some breathe deeply, their chests lifting in long, steady cycles. Others breathe more shallowly, their movements subtle, almost imperceptible. You listen. There is a faint sound beneath it all, a quiet layering of breath. Inhale, exhale, repeating. A commonly noted detail in historical observations is that opium use often produced visible changes in breathing patterns, with some individuals entering states of deep relaxation, while others experienced uneven or slowed respiration. You begin to recognize those variations here. To your left, someone exhales with a soft lingering wind, a long breath released slowly as though it has been held for a moment longer than necessary. You glance toward them, their faces relaxed, their eyes closed, their body still. There is no tension there, only a kind of surrender to stillness. Yes. Further along, another figure shifts. A small movement. Their hand lifts to their chest, then lowers again. Their breathing is less even, slightly irregular. Not distressed, but unsettled in a quiet way. You watch for a moment, then look away. You begin to understand that rest here does not look the same for everyone. Some settle easily, others move through it more gradually. A curious note found in certain lesser-known accounts suggests that coughing was a common sound in these environments, not always constant, but present enough to become part of the background. You notice it now. A soft cough, then another further away. Not sharp, not alarming, just part of the room's quiet reality. No one reacts. The sound rises, then fades, absorbed into the same stillness that holds everything else. You shift slightly on your pallet. Your body responds with ease now. The surface beneath you no longer feels unfamiliar. It supports you without drawing attention to itself. You notice your own breathing again. Steady, even, slower than when you arrived. Your chest rises gently, then falls. There is no effort in it, just a quiet continuation. A broader interpretation offered by medical historians is that while opium was often associated with escape or indulgence, it also functioned in many cases as a form of relief from physical pain, exhaustion, or chronic discomfort. You see that reflected here in the way bodies settle, not dramatically, but noticeably, a release, however temporary. You turn your head slightly. A figure nearby lies with their arm draped across their eyes, shielding themselves from the dim light. Their fingers twitch faintly, then grow still again. It is a small detail, but it draws your attention. These are not statues, not frozen images. They are living bodies, shifting, adjusting, responding. You notice another movement. Across the room, someone turns onto their side, pulling a thin blanket closer around their shoulders. The motion is so careful, as though even this small act is guided by the same quiet rhythm that governs everything here. You begin to feel the weight of that rhythm more deeply. It does not press down. It settles gently. You listen again. The breathing, the occasional cough, the faint murmur of voices that has not fully disappeared, though it has softened further. All of it blends into something continuous, something that does not demand your attention but rewards it if you choose to notice. Scholars continue to discuss whether the peaceful appearance often described in such spaces masked underlying risks, particularly in relation to overuse or physical decline. As you observe the room, you sense that both can exist at once. There is calm, there is rest, And there are quieter signs that not everything is as gentle as it appears. You notice a figure further away. Their breathing is very odd slow, so slow that for a moment you are not sure if it's moving at all. You watch, waiting. Then after a pause that feels longer than it should, their chest rises. A small breath, followed by an even slow. There is no alarm in the room. No one rushes toward them. This too seems to fall within the range of what is expected here. You feel a subtle shift in your awareness. Not fear, but a recognition that this stillness has edges, quiet ones, but present. You take a slow breath yourself, grounding. Your hand moves slightly, resting more firmly against the pallet beneath you. You feel the texture, the warmth, the reality of your own body within the space. You are here, not just observing, experiencing. You glance again at the others, each one in their own state, some deeply at rest, some moving gently within it, some hovering somewhere in between. You begin to see the room not as a single experience, but as many layered together. Each person carrying their own rhythm, their own response, their own reason for being here. A small sound draws your attention once more. A faint whisper, then silence again. The room continues, unbroken, steady. You feel your own body settle further, your muscles relaxing, your breath aligning more closely with the slower patterns around you. There is a sense, subtle but growing, that you are no longer separate from what you're observing. You are part of it, another body at rest, another rhythm within the room. You close your eyes for a brief moment, then open them again. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels more deeply understood. You remain lying there, your body at ease within the quiet rhythm of the room, when your attention begins to drift towards something smaller, something easy to overlook at first. The details of comfort. Not grand comforts, not the kind you might expect in a place designed for rest, but small practical gestures that shape the experience in subtle ways. You notice it in the movement near the low table again. A cup is lifted, not quickly, not with urgency, or not with urgency, just enough to bring it to the lips. You watch as the figure drinks, a small amount, then lowers it again. The action is simple, but it carries a sense of care. A grounded observation drawn from historical accounts suggests that tea and water were often present in opium dens, not as luxuries but as necessities, helping to ease dryness, settle the body and provide a basic form of comfort. You see that purpose here without needing an explanation. You become aware of your own mouth. Dry, not uncomfortably so, but enough to notice. You shift slightly, your eyes scanning the nearby surfaces. There within reach of another pallet sits a small cup. Unattended, you hesitate for a moment, then reach for it. Your fingers wrap around its surface. It is warm, not hot. The warmth feels steady, as though it has been holding its temperature for some time. You bring it closer, pause briefly, then take a small sip. The liquid is mild, faintly bitter, but soothing in a quiet way. You swallow, and feel the difference immediately. Subtle, but real. Your throat relaxes, your breath settles more easily. You lower the cup again, placing it back where you found it, carefully, respecting the quiet order of the space. A lesser-known detail found in certain period descriptions suggests that some dens maintained a steady supply of tea, not only for comfort, but as part of a routine that helps structure the otherwise unmeasured flow of time within the room. You sense that quiet structure now, not enforced, but present. You notice another small movement nearby. A thin blanket is adjusted, pulled slightly higher across a pair of shoulders. The fabric is simple, worn, but it serves its purpose, providing a layer of warmth that complements the already heavy air. You reach toward the edge of your own pallet. Your fingers find a similar piece of fabric. You draw it closer, draping it lightly across to your body. The effect is immediate, not dramatic, but grounding. You feel more contained, more settled within your own space. You begin to understand that comfort here is not about luxury. It's about small adjustments, tiny acts that make the environment easier to remain within. You glance again toward the table. There are more objects than you first noticed. Small containers, simple tools, items arranged with a kind of quieted intention. Nothing excessive. Nothing decorative. Everything has a function. An interpretation often suggested by social historians is that these modest provisions help transform the den from a purely transactional space into something that resembled a temporary refuge, however imperfect. You feel that transformation now. This is not a place designed for display. It is a place designed for staying. You take another slow breath. The air feels slightly easier now. Whether from the sip of tea or from your growing familiarity with the environment, you cannot say. Perhaps both. You notice a faint exchange across the room. One figure passes a cup to another. The movement is careful, unspoken. The second figure accepts it with a small nod, then drinks. A quiet sharing. No ceremony. No acknowledgement beyond the act itself. You realize that these small interactions carry weight, not in the sense of importance, but in the sense of connection. They bind the space together. You shift your position slightly, pull in the blanket closer around your shoulders. Your body responds by relaxing further, your muscles loosening, your breath deepening. A thoughtful consideration raised in some historical discussions is that such environments provided not only physical relief but also a kind of emotional stillness, where the demands of the outside world were temporarily set aside. As you lie here, you begin to feel that stillness more clearly. There is nothing required of you, no task waiting, no expectation pressing in, only the present. Only the present moment. You notice your hands again, resting more loosely now. No tension in your fingers, no need to move. You let them remain where they are. The room continues, unchanged, steady. The same dim light, the same quiet figures, the same slow unfolding of time that no longer needs to be measured. You take another sip from the memory of the warmth that lingers in your throat and allow yourself to settle even deeper into the fabric, into the air, into the quiet comfort of small things that ask nothing more than your attention. You remain wrapped in that small layer of warmth, the blanket resting lightly across your shoulders, the faint taste of tea still lingering as your attention shifts once more. This time it moves towards something less obvious at first glance. The presence of women. Not many, but not absent either. You notice one across the room, partly turned away from the light. Her posture is composed, not withdrawn, but contained. The way she holds herself feels deliberate, as though every movement has been learned through experience rather than impulse. Her clothing is simple, though arranged with a certain care. The fabric falls in a way that suggests attention to appearance even within this dim and private space. She does not draw attention to herself, and yet once you notice her, it becomes difficult to ignore her presence. A broadly supported historical perspective indicates that while opium dens were often portrayed as male-dominated spaces, women did enter and occupy these environments, though their roles and experiences could differ significantly depending on social status and circumstance. You begin to sense that complexity here. You watch quietly. She shifts slightly, adjusting her position on the pallet. The movement is controlled, almost measured in the same way you have seen elsewhere in the room. But there is an added layer of awareness, a subtle attentiveness to how she occupies space. Not tension, but intention. Nearby, another figure sits closer to the wall, a woman as well. Her posture is more relaxed, her movements less guarded. She leans slightly forward, her hand resting loosely in her lap. Her gaze drifts across the room without focusing on any one point. Two different presences, two different ways of being within the same environment. An unusual detail noted in some period accounts is that women in opium dens were often described in contrasting ways, either as marginalized figures seeking escape or as individuals navigating these spaces with quiet familiarity and agency. Observing now, you can imagine both interpretations existing at once. You shift your head slightly on the pallet, your eyes adjusting to the subtle differences in light and shadow. You notice how others in the room respond, or rather how they do not. There is no overt attention directed toward either woman, no obvious distinction in how they are treated. The same quiet respect, or perhaps indifference, extends across the space, and yet there is something unspoken, a layer beneath the surface. You sense it in the small details, the slight distance maintained by those nearby, the careful way space is shared without overlap, not exclusion, but awareness. A thoughtful observation raised in social studies suggests that gender shaped experiences within such environments in ways that were often subtle rather than overt, influencing how individuals moved, interacted, and were perceived without always being directly acknowledged. You begin to feel that subtle influence here. You draw a slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. The room remains steady, unchanged, but your understanding of it deepens. You notice the first woman again. Her gaze shifts briefly, not toward you, but across the room, following something you cannot see, then returning to stillness. There is a sense that she is present in a different way, more aware, more observant. You wonder briefly what has brought her here, not in detail, just in outline, the same quiet question you have asked of others, but here it feels more layered, more complex. Scholars continue to explore how societal expectations and constraints influence the presence of women in spaces like these, shaping not only why they came, but how they were seen by others. Sitting here, you sense that those influences do not disappear at the threshold. They shift, they adapt, but they remain. You notice the second woman again. She exhales slowly, her shoulders relaxing further. Her posture softens. Her presence blends more fully into the room, less distinct, more part of the whole. You realize that visibility here is fluid. Sometimes you notice, sometimes you do not, and that too feels intentional in its own quiet way. You adjust your blanket slightly, pulling it closer, your body responding to the continued stillness. Your breathing steady, your thoughts calm. The room continues its slow unfolding. No sudden changes, no sharp interruption. Only the quiet coexistence of different lives, different experiences layered together within the same dim space. You glance once more across the room. The two women remain, each within her own rhythm, each part of the same shared environment. And you lying here among them feel that shared presence deepen, not through interaction, but through awareness. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again. The light remains soft. The air remains warm, and the quiet complexity of the room continues to reveal itself one small detail at a time. You remain within that quiet awareness, your body still, your thoughts moving gently, when your attention begins to turn outward again, not toward the room itself this time, but towards something beyond it. The stories you have heard, the ones carried in from outside, they begin to surface slowly, almost like echoes. You remember the way such places are often described: dark, dangerous, filled with extremes. Places where people lose themselves entirely, where everything feels heightened and unpredictable. And yet as you lie here, the reality feels different. Not completely opposite, but more subdued, more ordinary. A commonly circulated narrative in the 19th century, particularly in newspapers and reform literature, portrayed opium dens as places of moral collapse and exotic danger, often exaggerating their atmosphere to capture attention and provoke fear. You sense that contrast now between what is said and what is seen. You glance around the room again, the same dim light, the same slow movements, the same quiet presence of those resting nearby. Nothing here feels theatrical, nothing feels designed to shock. Instead, it feels contained, private. You take a slow breath. The air settles into you as it has before. Familiar now, less foreign. You think about how these stories must have been formed, perhaps by those who visited briefly, noticing only what stood out to them, perhaps by those who never entered at all, imagining what might be happening behind closed doors. A curious detail mentioned in some accounts is that visitors from outside certain communities often described opium dens in ways that reflected their own fears or expectations, rather than the daily reality experienced by regular patrons. You begin to understand how easily perception can shape description. You shift your head slightly, your gaze drifting toward the entrance again. The door remains closed, unremarkable, and yet it holds a boundary between two very different versions of the same place. Outside, this room might be described in dramatic terms. Inside, it feels quiet, measured. You notice a faint conversation nearby. Two figures speaking softly, their voices low enough that the words blend together, but the tone carries no urgency, no tension, just a simple exchange as ordinary as any conversation might be elsewhere. You listen for a moment, then let it fade back into the background. A thoughtful interpretation offered by historians suggests that many of the more sensational accounts of opium dens were shaped by cultural anxieties, particularly in cities where immigration and unfamiliar customs created uncertainty among local populations. You feel that layer of context now adding depth to what you see. You consider the room again, not as an isolated space, but as part of a larger world, connected to trade, to movement, to changing cities and shifting populations. All of that complexity exists beyond these walls, and yet inside the experience remains simple. You lie on a pallet, you breathe. You observe, you exist. Scholars continue to debate how much of the fear surrounding opium dens was rooted in genuine concern and how much was amplified by social and political tensions of the time. Sitting here, you sense that the answer is not one or the other. It is both. Layers of truth, layers of interpretation. You notice your own expectations, the ones you carried in with you, perhaps shaped by those same stories. You compare them now to what you have experienced. The difference is clear, not in a way that dismisses the stories entirely, but in a way that softens them, complicates them. You take another slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. The room continues its steady rhythm, unchanged by what is said about it elsewhere. You realize that for those who come here regularly, the outside narratives may feel distant, irrelevant. What matters is this: the immediate environment, the quiet routines, the small comforts. A lesser-known insight from certain historical discussions suggests that many patrons viewed these spaces not through the lens of morality or danger, but simply as places to rest, socialize quietly, or momentarily withdraw from demanding lives. You begin to see how that perspective fits with what surrounds you. You shift slightly on your pallet, the fabric beneath you warm, familiar now. You feel less like an outsider, less like someone comparing two worlds, more like someone existing within one. You glance once more toward the others, their presence steady, unaffected by the stories you recall. They do not perform. They do not confirm or deny anything. They simply remain. You close your eyes briefly, letting the memory of those outside narratives drift further away. When you open them again, the room feels even quieter. Not because it has changed, but because your attention has settled more fully within it. You no longer measure this place against what you expected. You simply experience it as it is. Dim, warm, slow, and quietly real. You remain in that softened awareness, the outside stories fading into the background when your attention begins to shift once more. This time not toward individuals or atmosphere, but toward something broader. The quiet system that supports all of this. At first, it is not obvious. The room feels self-contained, almost separate from the world beyond its walls, but the longer you remain, the more you begin to sense that it is not isolated at all. It is connected, deeply. You think again of the door, of the alley, of the city just beyond. Goods move through that city every day. Ships arrive, carts unload, markets open and close, money changes hands in countless small exchanges. And somewhere within that flow, this place exists. A widely acknowledged historical reality is that the opium trade in the 19th century was part of a vast global network linking producers, traders, and consumers across continents with urban densities, representing only the final point in that long chain. You feel the weight of that connection now. What seems quiet and contained here is in fact the result of movement on a much larger scale. You glance again toward the keeper's desk. The ledger, the coins, small details, but part of that same network. Each entry written there represents more than a single visit. It reflects a system of exchange that reaches far beyond this room. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same, warm, heavy, unchanged, and yet your understanding of it deepens. You begin to notice the patterns more clearly, the way people arrive, the way they settle. The way they leave, though you have not yet seen it happen. There is a rhythm to it, not chaotic, not random, a quiet flow that maintains itself without drawing attention. An interesting detail mentioned in certain historical observations is that some dens operated with surprising regularity, with frequent visitors returning at similar times, creating a pattern that resembled routine more than disorder. You can imagine that pattern here even if you are only seeing a single moment within it. You shift slightly on your pallet, your body responding easily, the blanket still resting across your shoulders. You feel a subtle sense of structure beneath the calm. It's not visible in obvious ways, but it is present. You think of the people around you again. The labourer, the traveller, the woman sitting near the wall. Each one has arrived through different paths, different circumstances, and yet here they share the same space. A reflective interpretation offered by social historians and suggests that opium dens often served as intersections of economic and social forces where individuals from varied backgrounds came together within a system shaped by both necessity and opportunity. You begin to see that intersection more clearly. This room is not separate from the world. It is shaped by it. You glance toward the small table again. The tools, the careful preparation you observed earlier. Those actions too are part of a larger system. Skills passed from one person to another. Practices refined over time. Nothing here exists without context. Scholars continue to explore how economic pressures, particularly in rapidly growing cities, contributed to the spread of such environments, making them both a response to and a reflection of urban life during the period. Sitting here, you sense that connection without needing to see the wider city. You feel it in the density of the room, in the number of people sharing a small space, in the quiet efficiency of its operation. You take another slow breath and let your thoughts settle again. The broader picture does not disturb the calm, it simply adds depth to it. You notice a small movement near the entrance. Someone has arrived. Their presence is quiet, almost unnoticed at first. They move toward the desk. The same path you took, the same brief exchange. Coins placed, a glance, a gesture. Then they move into the room. The flow continues, without interruption, without disruption. A lesser-known observation from some historical discussions suggests that these spaces often functioned as part of informal urban economies operating alongside more visible businesses while remaining largely unregulated or overlooked. You sense that hidden economy now quietly sustaining itself. You watch as the new arrival finds a place, settles, becomes part of the same rhythm, just as you did. There is no announcement, no acknowledgement. They are simply absorbed into the room. You shift your position slightly, your body comfortable now, your breathing steady. You feel less like someone observing from the outside, more like someone existing within a system that, while unfamiliar, no longer feels entirely unknown. The room continues, holding its quiet balance, supported by forces both seen and unseen. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sense of connection settle. Then open them again. The dim light, the steady presence of others, the quiet flow of arrival and rest, all of it remains, and you remain within it, aware now that this small hidden space is not isolated, but part of something much larger quietly unfolding beyond the walls. You remain still, your body settled, your awareness now holding both the quiet room and the wider world it connects to. Gradually your attention begins to shift again, this time towards something less visible but deeply present, the feeling of being watched, not here within the room, but from beyond it. You think again of the stories, not just their tone, but their purpose, why they were who told them, and who listened. A broadly supported interpretation from historical studies suggests that opium dens often became symbols within larger conversations about morality, immigration, and social order, especially in cities undergoing rapid change. You begin to sense that symbolic weight even while lying in this calm, subdued space. You glance around the room again. Nothing here feels like a symbol. It feels ordinary, quiet, human, and yet beyond these walls it may be seen very differently. You consider the people here, their clothing, their faces, their small, careful movements. Some would be viewed with suspicion, others with pity, others still with curiosity. Not because of what they're doing in this moment, but because of how they fit into the broader structure of society. You shift your head slightly, your gaze drifting toward the entrance once more. The door remains closed, but it now feels like more than a simple barrier. It is a threshold between perception and reality. An unusual detail noted in certain accounts is that authorities and reformers often focused on specific groups when describing opium use, particularly targeting communities that were already viewed as outsiders, which shaped public understanding in ways that did not always reflect the full picture. You begin to understand how selective attention can shape entire narratives. You think of the traveller you noticed earlier, the subtle differences in clothing, the sense of distance carried in their presence. Outside this room they might be judged more quickly, defined by appearance rather than by the quiet stillness you see now. You take a slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. The air remains unchanged, steady, neutral. It does not carry judgment. It simply exists. A reflective perspective from social historians suggests that class also played a significant role in how opium use was perceived, with similar behaviors being interpreted differently depending on who engaged in them. You feel that layered perception now adding another dimension to what you observe. You glance again toward the figure with more structured clothing. Their presence feels different, more contained, perhaps more protected from certain assumptions. Yet here within this room, those differences soften. Not entirely, but enough that they no longer dominate the space. You begin to notice how the room itself reduces contrast. The dim light, the shared stillness, the absence of strong markers of stress. Everything's brought closer together, not equal, but less divided. Scholars continue to examine how moral panic surrounding opium dens was often intertwined with anxieties about race and class, influencing both policy and public perception during the period. As you lie here, you sense that those anxieties exist outside, pressing against the walls of this quiet space. Inside, the reality is more subdued, more complex. You shift slightly on your palate, the fabric beneath you familiar now, your body responding with ease. You notice a small interaction near the far wall, two figures adjusting their positions to allow another to pass. No words, just a brief awareness, a shared understanding. The movement happens without friction, without hesitation. You realize that within the space, the rules are different, not written, but felt. Respect is not declared, it's practiced or quietly. You take another slow breath, your thoughts moving gently. You consider how easily this room could be misunderstood, viewed from the outside without context, reduced to a single idea, a single story. And yet within it you have seen layers, people, routines, small acts of care. A curious observation from certain historical discussions suggests that even those who criticized opium dens sometimes acknowledged their role as places of temporary refuge, though this aspect was often overshadowed by more dramatic narratives. You begin to understand how something can be both criticized and relied upon at the same time. You glance once more across the room. The figures remain, each within their own quiet state, unaffected by the judgments that may exist beyond the door. You feel a subtle shift in your perspective, less influenced now by the outside stories, more grounded in what you have seen, what you have experienced. You adjust your blanket slightly, your hands resting more loosely, your shoulders relaxed. The room continues, unchanged, holding its quiet balance despite the weight of perception that surrounds it. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that balance settle within you. Then open them in. The dim light remains, the air remains warm, and the quiet truth of the space continues to unfold gently without needing to defend itself. You remain within that quiet balance, your body still, your thoughts settled when something shifts at the edge of the room. It is not loud, not sudden, but noticeable in the way small changes often are here. A slight movement near the entrance. Your gaze drifts toward the door again. It opens, only a little, just enough to let in a narrow line of cooler air, and with it a different presence. Not disruptive, but distinct. A grounded historical observation indicates that opium dens in many cities existed under varying degrees of scrutiny, with periodic inspections or informal oversight depending on local laws and enforcement practices. You begin to sense that reality now not as something dramatic, but as something woven quietly into the life of the room. Two figures step inside. Their posture is different from the others, more upright, more alert. Their clothing carries a sharper structure, less softened by wear. Their eyes move across the space with a kind of focused awareness that contrasts with the slower gaze of those resting. The room responds, not with panic, not with sudden movement, but with a subtle shift. You feel it rather than see it. The breathing around you remains steady, but there is a faint tightening in the air, a slight increase in awareness that moves through the space without breaking its calm. You remain still, watching. The figures near the door speak briefly with the keeper. Their voice is low, controlled. The exchange is short, No raised tones, no visible just a quiet interaction that carries more weight than it reveals. A curious detail noted in certain historical accounts is that some dens operated with an understanding of when inspections might occur, allowing them to maintain a careful balance between visibility and discretion. You begin to understand how such awareness could shape behaviour. The keeper's posture remains composed, unchanged, their movements steady. They respond, perhaps answering a question, perhaps simply acknowledging the presence of those who have entered. You cannot hear the words clearly, but you sense the tone, measured, neutral. The two figures move slightly further into the room. Not far, just enough to observe. Their eyes pass over the pallets, the resting bodies, the small table, the dim light. You feel their gaze briefly, not directed at you specifically, but encompassing the space as a whole. You remain still. Your breathing even, matching the rhythm you have learned. Around you the others do the same. No one sits up abruptly. No one speaks out. The room holds its calm. A reflective interpretation offered by historians suggests that interactions between authorities in such spaces often involved a complex mix of enforcement tolerance and negotiation, rather than constant confrontation. You sense that complexity here in the quietness of the moment. The figures pause, then turn slightly, their attention returning to the keeper. Another brief exchange, a nod, a small gesture. Then just as quietly as they entered, they move back toward the door. It opens again. The cooler air returns for a moment, then disappears as the door closes once more. The room settles. Almost immediately, the subtle tension that passed through it fades, not dramatically, but gently, as though it had only ever been a surface ripple. You take a slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. The air feels the same again, warm, heavy, unchanged. You notice a small movement nearby. Someone adjusts their blanket, another shifts slightly on their pallet. These are the only signs that anything has occurred. A broader observation from historical studies suggests that many such spaces developed ways of maintaining continuity, even under external pressure, allowing daily routines to resume quickly after interruptions. You feel that continuity now. The rhythm returns, steady, unbroken. You glance once more toward the entrance. The door stands as it did before, closed, unremarkable, and yet you now understand that it's not simply a boundary between inside and outside. It is a point of contact, a place where two different worlds meet briefly then separate again. You settle deeper into your position, your body relaxing once more, your awareness softening. The moment has passed, and yet it has added another layer to your understanding. This room is not entirely removed from the world. It is watched, visited, touched by forces beyond its walls, and still it continues, quietly, without resistance. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the calm return fully, then open them again. The dim light, the quiet figures, the steady breath of the room, all remain, as though nothing has changed. And yet you know now that beneath this calm surface there is a constant balance being maintained gently, carefully, without drawing attention to itself. You settle again into the quiet after that brief interruption, your body returning to stillness with surprising ease. The room has absorbed the moment, smoothing it over until it feels as though it barely happened. And yet something has shifted in your awareness. You begin to notice not just what people are doing, but how they remain, why they stay. Your attention drifts to the figure beside you again, the one whose breathing has now settled into a slower, deeper rhythm. There is a familiarity in their stillness, not the tentative quiet of someone new, but the ease of someone who knows this space well. Their body seems to rest without resistance, as though this place fits them. A well-supported conclusion in historical research is that repeated use of opium often became part of daily routine for certain individuals, blending into the structure of life rather than standing apart as an isolated act. You begin to sense that blending here. This is not always a rare visit. For some it is regular, expected. You shift slightly on your pallet, your hand brushing the fabric. Your body remains comfortable, but your thoughts begin to move in a different direction. You consider the idea of habit, how something repeated slowly becomes familiar, then expected, then difficult to step away from. You glance across the room. The same figures remain, some unchanged in posture, some shifting only slightly. each one moving within their own quiet pattern. An unusual observation recorded in certain accounts suggests that regular visitors could often be recognized not by appearance alone, but by the ease with which they move through the space, their actions smooth, unhurried, and precise. You recognize that ease now in several of the people around you. There is no hesitation, no uncertainty. They know where to rest, how to move, when to remain still. You notice the figure near the table again. Their posture relaxed now, but with a subtle readiness that suggests familiarity with what will come next. Not anticipation in a sharp sense. More like expectation, a gentle knowing. Scholars continue to explore whether dependence in such environments was driven more by the physical effects of the substance or by the psychological comfort of routine and environment. As you observe, you begin to understand how both could intertwine. The room itself supports repetition, the same dim light, the same warmth, the same quiet acceptance of stillness. You take a slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. You feel how easily your own body has adjusted, how quickly your movements have slowed, how naturally your breathing has matched the rhythm around you. It does not take long. That realization settles gently, not as something alarming, but as something worth noticing. You shift your head slightly, looking toward another figure further along. They lie very still, their face calm, their hands resting loosely at their sides. There is a sense of deep rest there. But also something else, a quiet distance, not from the room, but from everything beyond it. A reflective perspective offered by historians suggests that for many individuals, spaces like this provided not only relief from physical strain, but also a temporary escape from social pressures, responsibilities, and uncertainties. You begin to see that possibility here. The outside world feels far away, not just physically, but mentally. You notice your own thoughts, how they have slowed, how they no longer move toward plans or concerns. They simply drift, lightly. You realize how easy it would be to return to this, again and again, not out of urgency, but out of familiarity. A quiet pull. You adjust your blanket slightly, your hands moving without effort. Your body remains at ease. The room continues its steady rhythm. No changes, no interruption, just the same soft unfolding. You notice a faint exchange nearby, a glance between two figures, a small nod, no words, yet something is understood, perhaps recognition, perhaps routine, a subtle connection formed through repeated presence. A lesser-known insight from historical discussions suggests that social bonds within such environments were often understated, built through shared experience rather than explicit interaction. You feel that understated connection now. You are not alone, but you are not required to engage. You simply exist alongside others who share the same space, the same air, the same slow passage of time. You take another breath and let it out slowly. Your body sinks a little deeper into the palate, your muscles relaxing further. There is a quiet clarity forming. This place does not demand. It does not call out. It simply remains available, consistent, predictable in its own gentle way, and that consistency carries its own kind of weight. You glance once more across the room. The figures remain, each within their own quiet state, each following their own rhythm, and yet all connected by the same environment, the same routine, the same unspoken understanding. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that understanding settle, then open them again. The dim light, the steady warmth, the quiet presence of others, all remain, and you now begin to understand not just how this place functions, but why it continues to draw people back into its slow, familiar embrace. You remain within that quiet understanding, your body settled, your thoughts moving gently when your attention begins to follow a different pattern in the room. Movement, not the slow adjustments you have grown used to, but something more purposeful. Near the entrance, a figure rises, carefully, without drawing attention. Their movement is smooth, practiced, as though they have done this many times before. They do not disturb those around them. They step between the narrow spaces with quiet precision, their awareness extending beyond their own body to include everyone nearby. You watch. They pause briefly near the desk. A small exchange takes place, almost invisible. A nod, a gesture. Then they move toward the door. It opens just enough Cool air slips in again. Then they are gone. The door closes, and the room continues. An established pattern noted in historical descriptions is that regular visitors often moved through opium dens with a quiet familiarity, arriving and leaving at their own pace without disrupting the overall calm. You see that pattern clearly now. This is not a place where everyone stays indefinitely. There is a flow, subtle, continuous. You glance toward another part of the room. A different figure is preparing to settle. Their movements are slower, less practiced than the one who just left, but still guided by the same unspoken rules. They remove their shoes, place them carefully near the edge of a pallet, lower themselves into position with care. Arrival and departure, happening at the same time, a quiet overlap of different moments. A curious observation from certain accounts suggests that some regulars developed almost fixed routines visiting at similar times each day or night, creating a pattern that blended seamlessly into their wider lives. You begin to imagine those routines now. People come in here after work, after long hours, after days that demand more than they can easily give, then leaving again, returning to the outside world. You take a slow breath. The air remains steady, unchanged by these small transitions. You notice another figure, one who has been here longer. Their posture suggests deep rest, but there is also a readiness in the way their body is positioned, as though they could rise at any moment, not abruptly, but with the same controlled movement you've already seen. They shift slightly, then remain still again. A thoughtful interpretation offered by historians suggests that for some individuals, opium dens functioned as part of a daily rhythm rather than an escape from it, integrated into routines that included work, rest, and social interaction. You begin to see how that integration might feel. This place is not separate from life. It is part of it. You adjust your position slightly, your body responding easily. Your movements now as quiet as those around you. You realize that you too have learned how to move within this space. Without instruction, without effort, your gaze drifts toward the door again. You begin to notice how it frames each transition, opening, closing, each time a brief connection to the outside world, then a return to stillness. A lesser-known detail from historical discussions suggests that the timing of visits could vary widely, with some individuals arriving late into the night while others came earlier, creating a continuous cycle rather than a fixed schedule. You feel that continuity now. There is no single moment when the room is full or empty. It simply shifts, gradually. You watch as another figure near the far wall begins to gather themselves. They sit up slowly, pause, then adjust their clothing. Their movements are careful, deliberate. They do not rush. Even departure follows the same rhythm. You notice how they take a moment before standing fully, as though allowing their body to return to a different state. Then they rise, step carefully between the pallets, move toward the desk. The same brief exchange, the same quiet acknowledgement, then toward the door, and out. The room absorbs their absence without change. No gap, no disruption, just a slight adjustment in space. You take another slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. You feel a growing sense of understanding. This place is not defined by who is here at any one moment. It is defined by its continuity, its ability to remain steady as people come and go. Scholars continue to explore how such environments maintain this balance, allowing for individual movement within a shared space without losing their overall calm. As you lie here, you sense that balance clearly. It's not controlled by any single person. It is maintained collectively, through quiet awareness, through shared rhythm. You glance once more across the room. The figures remain, some new, some familiar, all moving within the same gentle pattern. You feel yourself fully part of it now, not observing from the outside, but existing within the flow. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. The dim light, the steady warmth, the quiet cycle of arrival and departure, all continue, unbroken, and you remain within it. The presence among many. Moving slowly, resting quietly, carried along by the same gentle rhythm that guides everyone here. You remain within that quiet flow, your body at ease, your awareness gently following the rhythm of arrivals and departures when something begins to change again. Not suddenly, not sharply, but gradually. The light. At first, you are not sure if it is real or imagined. The lamps still burn as they have all along their glow, steady, their small flames unchanged. And yet there is a faint difference in the room, a softness shifting, a subtle thinning of the darkness near the edges. You turn your head slightly, your gaze drifting toward the entrance. The door remains closed, but something beyond it has changed. A well-grounded observation from historical descriptions is that many opium dens operated through the night, with some patrons remaining until the early hours of morning, when the first light of day began to alter the atmosphere of the space. You begin to sense that transition now. You take a slow breath. The air feels the same, warm, heavy, and yet the room itself feels slightly different. You notice it in the way shadows fall, less dense, less complete, as though the darkness no longer fully holds the space. You shift your position slightly, your body responding easily, the blanket still resting lightly across you. Your eyes move across the room. The figures remain, but their outlines feel clearer. Not dramatically, just enough that details emerge more easily. A hand, a shoulder, the subtle rise and fall of breath. A curious detail mentioned in certain accounts is that the early morning light often revealed aspects of these spaces that were less noticeable at night, softening their mystery and making them appear more ordinary, more grounded. You feel that shift now. The room is still the same, but it feels less hidden, less enclosed. You notice a figure nearby stirring, not abruptly, but with a slow return of awareness. Their eyes open slightly, then close again. Their body shifts, adjusting to the subtle change in light. Others remain still, deep within their own quiet states. A reflective interpretation offered by historians suggests that the transition from night to morning in such environments often marked a shift not only in light, but in perception as the space became less detached from the outside world. You begin to feel that connection returning. You listen. The faint sounds of the city begin to reappear, distant at first, almost indistinguishable from the soft murmur within the room, but gradually they separate. A carriage passing, a voice somewhere far away. The outside world is waking, and its presence begins to reach into this space. You take another slow breath, your chest rising, then falling. The air remains steady, but your awareness expands. You are no longer fully removed from what lies beyond the door. You notice another figure sitting alone. Their movements slow, deliberate. They pause as though adjusting to the return of light, then lower their gaze again, not fully leaving their state, but not as deeply within it as before. A lesser-known observation from certain historical discussions suggests that some patrons preferred to leave before daylight, while others remained allowing the transition to unfold gradually around them. You begin to see both responses here. Near the entrance, a figure rises, moves toward the desk. The same quiet exchange. Then toward the door, it opens. This time the light that enters is different. Not just cooler, but clearer, more defined. It touches the floor briefly, then disappears as the door closes again. You watch that moment carefully. It feels significant, not because it changes the room entirely, but because it reminds you of what lies beyond. You shift slightly on your palate. Your body's still comfortable, but your awareness more alert. You begin to notice details you had not focused on before. The texture of the walls, the arrangement of objects, the small variations in the fabric around you. Everything feels more visible now, not because it has changed, but because the light allows it. Scholars continue to examine how daylight altered the perception of such spaces, often reducing their mystique and revealing them as more ordinary environments shaped by daily use. As you lie here, you begin to understand that shift. The room feels less like a hidden world, more like a place, a real physical space that exists within the same city you left behind. You take another breath and let it out slowly. The calm remains, but it is different now, less detached, more grounded. You glance once more across the room. Some figures remain still, others begin to stir, each responding to the changing light in their own way. You feel your own body respond, not with urgency, but with awareness. The night is passing. The room continues, but its connection to the outside world grows stronger with each subtle shift in light. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. The dim glow, the early hints of morning, the quiet presence of others. All remain, and you now exist within that gentle transition where night softens into day without ever fully breaking the calm. You remain within that gentle transition, your body still resting your awareness, now balancing between the quiet of the room and the growing presence of the outside world. The change is slow, but it continues. The light becomes clearer, not bright, but steady. It no longer feels like something distant pressing at the edges. It begins to settle into the room, revealing details that were once softened by the shadow. You shift slightly. Your body responds with a quiet readiness. Not tension, but a sense that the moment is moving forward. You glance toward the entrance again. The door remains closed, but it no longer feels like a barrier that separates two worlds entirely. It feels more like a passage you're beginning to consider. A well-supported observation from historical descriptions is that many individuals left opium dens in the early morning hours, returning to the routines of daily life, often carrying the quiet after effects of the night with them. You begin to sense that movement now. You take a slow breath. The air feels familiar, but lighter in a subtle way. Perhaps it is your awareness changing. Perhaps it is the shift in light. You cannot be certain. You notice a figure nearby beginning to gather their belongings. Their movements are slow, deliberate. They adjust their clothing, smooth the fabric, take a moment before standing. There is no rush. Even leaving for men follows the same measured rhythm that has defined everything here. You watch as they rise, step carefully between the pallets, move toward the desk. The same quiet exchange takes place. A nod, a brief acknowledgement, then they turn toward the door. It opens. This time the light that enters is unmistakably morning. Clear, soft. It touches the floor, stretches slightly further than before, then fades as the door closes again. The figure is gone, and the room continues. A curious detail found in some accounts suggests that for many patrons the act of leaving was not abrupt but gradual, involving small moments of pause and adjustment before fully stepping back into the outside world. You feel that gradualness now. You shift your position again, sitting up slightly. Your body feels different. Not heavy, not light, just aware. You place your feet gently on the floor. The coolness beneath them is more noticeable now, more distinct than it was earlier. You glance down. Your shoes remain where you placed them, unmoved, waiting. You do not reach for them yet. Instead, you sit for a moment longer, allowing yourself to adjust. Around you others remain, some still lying, some beginning to stir, each at their own pace. A thoughtful interpretation from historians suggests that the transition out of such environments often involved a quiet reorientation as individuals adjusted from the slow rhythm of the den back to the structured pace of daily life. You begin to feel that reorientation now. It does not happen all at once. It unfolds. You take another breath, your chest releasing, then falling. Your thoughts begin to gather more clearly, not rushing, but forming with more definition. You glance once more across the room. The details are clearer now. The textures, the shapes, the subtle signs of wear that tell of long use. Everything feels more grounded, less abstract. You reach for your shoes, your fingers wrapping around them. The material feels familiar, solid. You slip them on slowly. The act feels almost significant, a small step toward leaving. You stand, carefully. Your body adjusts to the upright position. There is a brief moment where you feel the difference, the shift from stillness to movement. Then it settles. You take a step, then another, moving between the pallets with the same quiet awareness you have learned. You pass close to those still resting. Your presence does not disturb them. The room continues, unchanged. You approach the desk. The keeper looks up briefly. Their expression remains neutral, steady. You pause. There is no need for words, just a small acknowledgement, a shared understanding that your time here is ending. A lesser-known observation from certain discussions suggests that departures from such spaces were often as understated as arrivals marked by minimal interaction and quiet continuity. You sense that understated quality now. You turn toward the door, your hand reaching for it. You pause for just a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. You take a final slow breath, the air of the room settling within you. Then you open the door. The morning air meets you, cooler, clearer. It feels different against your skin, sharper. You step through, and the room remains behind you. You step into the morning, and for a moment everything feels sharper than it should. The air is cooler against your face, cleaner. It moves more freely than the air you have just left behind. You pause just outside the door, letting your body adjust, allowing the difference to settle gradually rather than all at once. Behind you, the door closes with the same quiet finality it had when you first entered. You do not turn back immediately. Instead, you stand there, your breath steady, your awareness widening again to include the world beyond that narrow alley. The city is waking, not loudly, but steadily. A carriage passes somewhere nearby. Footsteps echo faintly along the street. A distant voice calls out, not urgent, just part of the rhythm of the morning. A well-grounded historical understanding indicates that for many urban workers in the 19th century, mornings began early and predictably with routines shaped by labour trade and the demands of daily survival. You feel that structure now pressing gently back into your awareness. It's different from the space you just left. More defined, more segmented. You take a slow breath and notice how it moves more easily through your chest. Your body responds to the change in air and light in space. You shift your weight slightly, your feet steady beneath you. The alley no longer feels as narrow as it did when you arrived. The light reveals its details more clearly now. The uneven stones, the worn walls, the small traces of life that were hidden in shadow before. You turn your head slightly, looking back at the door. It appears just as it did before. Plain, unremarkable. If you had not just stepped out of it, you might not notice it at all. An interesting observation from certain historical accounts is that many such entrances were intentionally discreet, allowing them to blend into the surrounding environment and avoid drawing attention. You understand that now in a more tangible way. There is no sign, no indication of what lies behind it, only memory. You take another breath. Your thoughts begin to settle into a clearer pattern. You consider what you have experienced, not as a single moment, but as a series of small layered impressions. The dim light, the steady warmth, the quiet presence of others, the slow passage of time. None of it dramatic, none of it exaggerated. A reflective interpretation offered by historians to suggest that the reality of opium dens often existed somewhere between the extremes presented in public narratives, shaped as much by ordinary human behaviour as by broader social forces. You begin to understand that balance now. It was not what you might have expected, and yet it was not entirely different either. It was quieter, more measured, more human. You begin to walk slowly down the alley, your steps steady, your body adjusting fully to movement again. The sounds of the city grow slightly clearer with each step. You pass a doorway, a window, a small detail that reminds you that life continues everywhere, not just in hidden spaces. Scholars continue to explore how environments like the one you left behind were shaped by overlapping forces, including global trade, local economies, social pressures, and individual choices. As you move forward, you carry that layered understanding with you. Nothing exists in isolation. Not the room, not the people within it, not even your own experience. You reach the end of the alley. The street opens before you. Light spreads more evenly here. The day has begun. You pause again, not because you need to, but because something within you remains connected to the slower rhythm you have just left. You feel it in your breathing, in the way your thoughts still move gently rather than sharply, in the absence of urgency. You realize that you carry a trace of that space with you. Not the air, not the scent, but the rhythm, a quieter pace, a softer awareness. A lesser known insight from historical discussions suggests that the effects of such environments often extended beyond the time spent within them, influencing how individuals experience the world afterward, even if only briefly. You begin to feel that extension now. You take one more slow breath, then allow it to release fully. The city continues around you, unchanged, unaffected by where you have been, and yet you are slightly different, not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle shift of perception. You begin to walk again, this time with much more certainty, your steps aligning with the rhythm of the street, the world moving forward as it always does, and behind you in that narrow alley the quiet room continues, holding its dim light, its steady warmth, its slow unfolding of time, unaffected by your departure. You do not need to see it to know that it remains, and that knowledge settles gently within you, like the final echo of a place that does not demand to be remembered, but lingers all the same. You continue forward, the morning light growing stronger, your awareness fully returned to the world around you, and slowly as your steps carry you further away, the quiet rhythm of the night begins to fade, not abruptly, but gently, like something that understands when it is time to let go. You draw one last slow breath and allow yourself to move on. The day ahead, the city alive, and the memory of that hidden space resting quietly behind you. Now as your thoughts begin to settle, you can let the edges of this experience soften. The alley fades first, the walls, the door. They drift gently out of focus, no longer holding your attention. The room follows, its dim light becoming softer, less defined. The figures within it resting quietly, then fading into stillness. The warmth lingers for a moment longer, then eases away. Your breathing remains slow, steady. Even there is no need to hold on to the details. Now, no need to follow every thought. You can let them pass, one by one. The sounds of the city quiet, the movement slows, and gradually all that remains is a sense of calm, a gentle stillness. You feel your body resting, supported, at ease, your mind no longer searching, no longer observing, just drifting, softly. The story settles, the night fades, and you are left in a quiet space of your own. Calm, warm, safe. You take one final slow breath and let it go. Sweet dreams.